So welcome everyone. Good almost evening, and welcome to today's webinar, which is on Pathways to New Zealand for Parents and Grandparents. First off, thank you all so much for attending at the end of your day. It's the middle of the week and we're coming very close to the end of the year. So I imagine a lot of individuals and businesses must be quite busy. So we do appreciate you giving us your time. A quick introduction to who I am. My name is Mahafreen Bariava. I am an associate in the McVeigh-Fleming immigration team. Aaron Hunt, as you all know, is the immigration team partner. Combined, we have over 15 to 20 years of immigration experience. Joining us also on the call today is our colleague Kim, who will be monitoring some of your questions coming through the Q&A function, so please feel free to ask. In terms of how the webinar is going to be structured today, so we're going to spend the first sort of 45 minutes or so chatting to you all about temporary options and permanent options available to parents and grandparents, and we'll go through that in a little bit more detail. After that, we'll really open the floor to questions from all of you, and we'll make it a more interactive session where you're welcome to ask us anything. Okay, so without further ado, we'll get straight into it. Just a quick disclaimer, of course, before we start. This webinar and the information you receive in this webinar it's meant to be more of a general and high-level overview about visa types available for parents and grandparents, and like any situation, specific situations will need specific advice. So don't rely on this presentation as the be-all and end-all, and talk to us if there's something in particular that you'd like to know or something that you believe might apply to you. And McVeigh-Fleming accepts no liability for any actions taken in reliance on this presentation. What will we be covering today? So very briefly, we'll be covering the visa options available to parents and grandparents. We'll talk about the temporary options that you could explore, as well as the permanent visa options available, and those would depend on individual circumstances too, and I guess what it is that you may want to achieve for your parents or your grandparents in the long term. We will also touch on the application process. This will be a high-level overview about the application process, some of the key considerations and information that you can supply in support of these applications. And then we're also going to have a session at the end, which is going to be our Q&A session. But prior to that, we're going to talk a little bit about what we believe might happen in the next year, at least, or what might be coming up for parent-grandparent visas, and where we sort of see things heading in the from the immigration perspective in terms of these types of visas. A little bit about who we are. We are McVeigh-Fleming. We are a full-service law firm. We are over 140 plus staff strong. In terms of the services we provide everything from property transactions, commercial. We assist clients with commercial transactions. We deal with family law. We also deal with employment law, and of course, immigration. Our firm caters to individuals from different walks of life. This is you've got businesses, you've got families, government entities, and individual clients as well. And even just within the immigration team, we actually provide advice and support to these four categories too. Our offices are located Auckland-wide, but we cater to the world. We have clients overseas, we have clients nationally, but our physical offices are located in Auckland, and we are scattered across Manukau, the CBD, and Albany. One of the great things about our firm, and I would argue that this is probably, in terms of diversity, this has to be the most diverse place I've worked at, which is fantastic for our immigration clients. We deal with, we have staff that speak a range of different languages, anything from Hindi to Punjabi to Marathi to Gujarati, right through to Cantonese, Tamil, Sinhalese, Russian, Korean, French, Malayalam, and Bahasa. Okay, so a little bit of an introduction about bringing parents and grandparents to New Zealand. I think always starting with an introduction is helpful. You get an idea about the government intentions, the policy intentions, and what some options might be. So a little bit about the parent category in itself. It's actually part of the family stream of the New Zealand Residence Program. And the idea there is it's not so much looked at from the I would say it's not so much looked at from the perspective of the parents as it is looked at from the perspective of the New Zealand citizens and residents who are already settled here. So the goal here is to enable New Zealand citizens and residents to be able to sponsor their parents for residence in New Zealand in order to support skilled migration. So a good example of that is that, if you were a very skilled, doctor or a engineer or an IT professional, we'd want to do our best to keep you on shore. And so enabling or giving you the ability to be able to support your parents and bring them to New Zealand would help to retain you and retain those skills. And so that's really the purpose of the parent category. And I think and of course to unite families and bring them together. But the intention there is to retain good quality skilled New Zealand citizens and residents. Where possible, I think, and generally the principle here is that the costs of bringing parents to New Zealand and any costs associated with things like their health and their well-being are usually costs that are to be borne by the adult children who sponsor them. And I guess the idea here is that it doesn't then put pressures on the healthcare services, which are already under a lot of pressure, some might argue, but also the, some of our social services. And so it becomes the responsibility of the New Zealand, of the adult children in New Zealand who sponsor them to bear those financial expenses. And this approach is actually consistent with Canada, Australia. The policies that they have in place arguably are slightly longer term, but those countries also support. They have longer term policies, and that's balanced with the idea that New Zealand, that the resident and citizen children will financially support their parents when they immigrate. Now, as you're all probably aware, there are temporary and permanent options available for parents and grandparents to live in New Zealand, and the temporary options are actually designed for your parents and grandparents to allow, to come to New Zealand to visit for a short time, and the intention is exactly that. It's that you must be able to demonstrate that that's what you plan to do. It's that your parents or grandparents intend to visit you and then return home, and that's why those options exist. Now, as we go through the webinar, it'll become very apparent that some of these categories are actually well in need for some reform. And in fact, earlier this year, the immigration minister did indicate that possible changes were coming to some of these parent-grandparent visas. We will discuss that more at the end of the webinar. But I think the most notable one, which again we'll touch on in more detail, is going to be the longer-term visitor visa option, especially which might be more appealing to people who might not be qualifying for the parent residence. Some interesting numbers. I think that this is, I find these sorts of things quite intriguing because it tells us what the immigration trends are and how things are looking. So for those of you, but some of this is also general fact, but still very interesting. So at the moment, Immigration New Zealand can approve a maximum of 2,000 visas per year to people who submitted expressions of interest before the restart of the selections on 10th October 2022. So just some context for those who might not know. At just after COVID hit or shortly after, the new parent category was introduced, and it then closed, and there was a temporary closure there, and it only reopened on the 10th of October 2022. So there were people that had been waiting in this queue for forever, really, for their parents' applications to be processed. So what Immigration New Zealand said that they'd do is they introduced a new policy, which is where the ballot came in. But what they did was they actually factored in people who had submitted applications prior, and for those people, they've allocated the 2,000 quota. So that number 2,000 there relates to people who submitted expressions of interest for residence under the parent category before the selections restarted in October 2022. That cohort of people is slowly decreasing because immigration is processing those applications, I'd probably say relatively quickly, now that the processing has reopened, and they're getting through it quite quickly. So what's going to happen is when all of those people and all of those numbers die down, then we're going to have a quota of 2,500 visas per year going forward to applicants under the parent residence category. Currently, currently from the ballot, only 500 visas a year can be granted. So you can think about people that have submitted applications, submitted expressions of interest in the pool from like 10th of October 2022. The chances of being selected when you're 1 in 10,000 to 20,000 is very, very slim, considering that currently the limit is only 500. That'll eventually change. But for now, that's what it is. In October alone, October 2024, Immigration New Zealand approved 286 parent resident visa applications. So these are 286 individual applications. I didn't look at the number of applicants, but it could be that there's, an individual and a partner, for example. But 286 visa applications were approved. And since October 2022, so this is under the ballot system, the number of expressions of interest submitted to the ballot were 10,543. So, and with selections taking place as less often as possible, you can think about how slim those chances are with that many applications currently in the queue, in the ballot to be selected. Okay, so just a quick comment on layout. I'll be talking about the short-term visa options. Aaron Hunt will then step in and talk about some of the permanent options, which I know is a hot topic for everyone. And then I'll talk a little bit about the application process, and then we'll move on to, telling you the future and our interactive Q&A session. So, short-term visa options. Arguably, there could be many, but there's the two most common which we're going to be discussing today. And the first and the most perhaps obvious one is the parent, and the most popular one is the parent-grandparent visitor visa. So the parent-grandparent visitor visa is a multiple entry visitor visa. Currently, the processing times of these applications, 80% of applications are being processed within 3 months. And this is just data I got this morning before we finalized our presentation. So it's quite recent. The maximum total stay allowed on this type of visa is 18 months. And the visa is generally issued for 3 years. And each individual stay is up to 6 months at a time. So what our clients sometimes do is once their parents are granted this visa, they usually, some choose to do 6 months in, 6 months out, 6 months in, 6 months out, and that then takes them through the full 3 years. Others usually wish to do an 18-month stretch. So 6 months in, and then they'll dip out and maybe make a trip to, say, Australia or Fiji, come back again, the 6 months resets again, they go offshore again, come back again, the 6 months resets again. So people do things a little differently. It just depends on what their needs are. But the interesting thing is, and Aaron can step in if we need to clarify this further, but the interesting thing is that the visa remains valid for 3 years, even if you use up the 18 months before the 3 years are complete, because you've maximized on your total stay. You can only apply for this visa while you are outside of New Zealand, and applicants that are submitting, so if you're applying for this visa, you must be sponsored by a child or a grandchild or their parent, and sponsors have to be New Zealand citizens or residents. And if you are a resident, you must hold a visa with no additional conditions attached to it. And if you do, or if you're unsure about that, feel free to have a chat with us and we can clarify that for you. As part of the visa application process, all applicants must agree to pay their own healthcare costs. Otherwise, their sponsors must cover that cost. On this visa, because it is a visitor visa, visa holders cannot work, but of interest, visa holders can study. So the visa does allow a 3-month study allowance per year. And so sometimes what a lot of families do is, just to keep their parents engaged or to keep their parents involved, and especially when parents are traveling in for as long as they are, sometimes they might enroll them in like a short-term English language course, one that might be less than 3 months long, or up to 3 months, just to keep them engaged and get them out and moving and out and about. So and also it helps them when they're for parents for whom English might not be the first language, or they might not be familiar with the language. It might be a good way to kind of bridge that language gap so that they can then become more mobile, catch the bus, catch public transport, buy things, interact with people, find their way home, communicate, basic things, go shopping, buy groceries, etc. So just something interesting to know. And then, of course, we've got the general visitor visa. Now, the parent-grandparent visitor visa, because it's a 3-year multiple entry visa, and it's granted for as long as it has, it does come with some additional documentation requirements, including, in most cases, well, all applicants of that visa type must submit, for example, a police clearance and medicals, because it's a long-term visa that's being granted. A general visitor visa, however, is more suitable for people who, families who only intend to bring their parents to New Zealand, at least for now, just for one trip, a single trip and back home, and then figuring out whether there's any intention of traveling to New Zealand in the future. But if it's just a one-off trip for now, then usually a general visitor visa is what people opt for, and that visa is usually granted as a single entry. Current processing time, 80% of applications are being processed within 4 weeks. I have an inkling that processing time frame might increase as we're coming close to the end of the year, because lots of people are going to want their families to visit during the Christmas New Year break and might not realize that they should be submitting applications now for that to be possible. So that might happen, or it could be that immigration increases its staff processing capacity, and this processing time frame may speed up. So we don't know. I'm hoping for the latter. So if granted, this visa can be valid for anywhere from 1 to 6 months. Given the short duration of the visa validity and the short visit, applicants are not required to provide police clearances and medicals. All applicants must demonstrate that they have sufficient funds to maintain their stay in New Zealand. Of course, you can supply sponsorship documentation as well. But yeah, it's helpful to be able to show as much information as possible on a general visitor visa application. And visa holders on this type of visa cannot work. Because this is a visitor visa. Okay, now passing on to Aaron, who will discuss long-term visa options.
Thanks, Mahafran. Okay, welcome everybody to today's session. Let's just go through the options that you've got, which generally sort of fall down to 2 base categories. First is the parent residence visa, which is the one that probably most of you are familiar with. It has gone from before, where you applied, you into a queue, and it was sort of allocated by when you applied. And with the course, they had they turned it off for several years, 5-6 years, and people waited for the entire period. Got restarted in October 22. And they brought this one here through. Now, this has gone from basically being a queue system to the lottery draw, which everyone seems to really dislike, and understandably, because you have no idea when it's going to take place. It allows your parents to come here and to basically live here forever. That's the great thing about a residence visa application. And of course, you can include more than one person in the application itself, and of course one person as the sponsor. You could actually have a couple sponsoring 2 parents, or even sponsoring all 4 parents if they earned enough. There's a 2-step process. As I said, you enter into the pool, you wait for the draws to take place every sort of 3 months. Your entries last the pool for 2 years. If it expires, you re-enter again, and you sort of wait for a response. They don't tell you when you haven't been drawn, so don't sit there and wait. It generally, if you get emailed, fantastic. If you don't, they're not going to tell you that you haven't been drawn yet. It basically will keep on going. It'll expire. You apply again. So keep an eye on when your dates do expire to apply every 2 years. They are very much done by random. No way of making it faster. We have had people who have applied and been drawn the first time. Others who have applied and have gone nowhere, and there's no way to change that at all, unfortunately. The numbers have, as Mahatma was saying, they've gone from, well, the idea was that you had 2,500 applicants per year be able to get residency through the parent resident visa. They did allocate 2,000 of that per year to the original queue we do it in order, and 500 per year going to this system. They have now sort of fast-tracked that first crew, and then once we see them getting out of the way, we'll see more being drawn from this every year. But currently the numbers are quite low as to how many are being drawn from this to go into the process. And we did see a massive slowdown this year as the backlog caught up and the visas are being granted. There was no new ones to be granted, and everything slowed down for the last sort of 8 months or so. Things are getting faster again, thank goodness. It is, it is the only option. It is based on the earnings of the sponsor, and you do require. Sorry, next slide. I think I've got one page. I think. Okay, so back a slide. I'll go more on the last slide. Thanks, my friend. So yeah, it is down to the earnings of the sponsor. Generally, you're looking at about sort of $100,000 base salary, very rough figures, and you add sort of $23,000 on for each sort of pair on top of that. There is online figures as to what you need, and they will be going up in February when we get the new median figures through, which get applied in February every year. So there will be a requirement then. The child also has to have been in New Zealand for the last 3 years, the majority of that time, and be a New Zealand resident for at least 3 years before you even enter into the pool. So don't go going, hey, I'm a resident holder now, I'm going to add my parents to the parent resident visa to the pool. Sorry, but you can't have had 3 years of residency till you can actually even enter your parents into the pool and go into that queue. Now, as an idea as to the timeframes for parent resident, I did a document yesterday for a client, and from the figures we're seeing, we're looking at between sort of 1 to 5%, probably being overly encouraging there, 5% of the chance of being drawn each year, probably less than that. But if you've got a 5% chance to be drawn, then over 10 years, it's about a 45, 43, 44% chance of being drawn over 10 years. So they're not great odds. So while it's definitely something that you should get into, and we hope that the minister does increase the numbers to more than 2,500 per year, right now it's not something you should rely on when it comes to your parents. If there's another option, definitely make use of this. But if you've got other options, then definitely look at other options as well. Now, parent retirement is a bit different. This, rather than being based on what the children have, it's based on what the parents have. It's sort of the investment visa type of visa for parents. It does require the parent to have $1.5 million of funds or in assets that they can make into funds liquidate. $1 million has to then come to New Zealand and be invested for 4 years. The other $500,000 is there for them to live off. Also requires them to show they've had $60,000 New Zealand in the past 12 months of income, whether it's passive income from rentals or investments or from actually working, so that they have had funds coming in. That amount isn't required to be ongoing because you come to New Zealand, you'll give your job up, but it does show there is funds there. It has been funds coming in to support the parent. So this is still a slow process, but at least here you can apply for it, and if you're eligible for it, you can look at perhaps about 1.5 years from going from application through to actually getting residence. There's a lot of rules around bringing the money into New Zealand with a certain time frame, and what you can invest in. So you can invest in certain companies, that sort of thing. But it is, if you have the funds, this is probably a better option than the parent resident, or perhaps just apply for both. You might get lucky with the draw. If not, this is a great option to do if you've got the funds to do it. I want to also mention the IPT. Now, we do a few of these, but they really are a final option. There's no other options to go, and if your parents cannot return home because they won't be safe in doing so, or they're too elderly, or they need help, then the IPT will often be an option. Now, there's two sort of tranches here. We have those who are already on shore and who can't go home, and they become unlawful. Then we can appeal under humanitarian grounds that they should remain in the country with their families. For those who have applied, say, for parent retirement and or parent resident, and for a reason that they haven't met the criteria, we see quite often their kids haven't been in New Zealand enough over the last 3 years, then you can go to the IPT and look for special circumstances. And so humanitarian grounds, if you're on shore and you're unlawful, the IPT can grant residence at that point. If they agree with you and say, yes, it's unjust and unduly harsh to send you back to your home country, we can grant residence in that situation. Now, if you're already offshore and at special circumstances, the IPT can say, yes, while immigration was correct in declining your application, your circumstances are special, and we'll go to the minister and give the minister a chance to grant you residence. I'm going to come back and comment on that later on, actually, about the ministerial side of things. But the IPT is, as I said, is the final option you've got in some situations. It is high risk, high reward. They can grant residence. But if you're on shore and have to become unlawful to go to the IPT, you're looking at being unlawful for 6, 8, 9, 12 months, depending how long it takes to do the process. After that, if the IPT says no, Immigration New Zealand are unlikely to grant you a visa again, or at least not anytime soon. So it is very much a high risk scenario as well. So it's really for our clients, if you have no other options, this is sort of the path that we'll often go down. And yeah, it's 8 to 12 months process. With regards to the special circumstances, it's situations where Immigration New Zealand have very strict rules that they can apply. You must meet this criteria, and they actually use the word must in the instructions. If it says must in the instructions, immigration have no discretion. So the IPT have discretion. They can say, okay, while immigration has to apply this rule of must, we think that the greatest scenario, the greatest circumstances, there's something there it's out of the ordinary, it's abnormal, it's different, it's makes it stand out. They can then say, okay, this needs to be looked at by the minister and give you a possibility of a chance of residence. So there is, it's not about INZ always doing their job wrong. It's often about INZ not having the discretion and the IPT having that discretion to grant a visa.
Cool. So heading now into the general summary of application requirements. Of course, each individual application will have its own set of documentation, but overall, there are some common documents that can be submitted with every application. We won't be going into an exact list because that list varies across the parent retirement category, the parent residence, the general visitor visa, and the parent grandparent visitor visa. But some of the identity documentation, like a passport, is common across them all. But in general, documentation must be clear, easy to read, and we recommend scanning all your documents in color. Too often we receive documents from clients which are in black and white. Sometimes the passports may be slightly faded. We can't quite see the passport number. Usually that can delay the process a little bit, especially when you're wanting family to come visit here, and you're wanting that to be turned around quite quickly. So ideally what you want to do is when you're submitting documents or uploading documents to the application form, especially if it's an online application, that you make sure that the documents can be easily read. We often recommend also scanning the passport as you would sort of, excuse me for the minor demo, but like this, as opposed to just scanning the photo page. It's often helpful to scan the front page like this, as well as a copy of the last page, which usually might have a little bit more information like the address of the passport holder or a contact information for the passport holder. Where documentation is in any other language but English, they will need to be translated, and translations must be completed by a certified and official translation service. So unfortunately, I hate to break it to you, but Google Translate just won't work. Where documents are not available, please, sorry, I realize there's a typo in there, but please reach out to us and discuss this with, or discuss it with your representative, or discuss it with Immigration New Zealand if you're applying yourself. So usually the types of documents that are common and are not easy to obtain, and what we normally see as the repeat offender documents are marriage certificates, birth certificates, and or sometimes even police clearance certificates from certain countries. So birth certificates, especially, for applicants from India, for example, can be incredibly difficult to obtain. And Immigration New Zealand does have a process in place for Indian applicants where birth certificates are not available. Sometimes applicants don't have marriage certificates because a marriage may be, in certain cultures may have only been recorded in the cultural sense, but there may not be any legal documentation because the marriage just wasn't registered. So that's very common. And in those cases, there are variations to information that can be provided. For the most part, Immigration New Zealand's quite accommodating in those situations, but it's always good to ask the question just to make sure you've been able to supply something else if those documents aren't available. A key tip, and you'd apply well in advance of an intended travel date just to ensure that a decision is made in sufficient time. You can actually check the Immigration New Zealand website for processing timeframes, and that gives you quite a reasonably accurate and as close to current processing timeframe as possible. So it's just worth checking, just so that you can allow enough time for the application to be processed. And when we say an application should be well prepared and decision ready, what we mean here is that when you submit a decision ready application, it's an application that Immigration New Zealand is highly unlikely to come back to you on with further questions, because it's almost like a case officer or Immigration New Zealand just takes a look at the application and says, oh, okay, passport supplied, tick. If required, medical supplied, tick. Police clearances supplied, tick. Relationship with sponsor, New Zealand resident supplied, tick. Sponsorship documents supplied, tick. So it's almost like it's it's the perfect application, an application which leaves no stone unturned and is basically ready for a decision and hopefully an approval if the documents are good quality and answer all of the questions that INZ might have. Of interest, the parent retirement category application is the only fully paper-based application under these parent category applications. So both the visitor visa applications are online, entirely an online-based process. The ballot and submitting an expression of interest into the pool is also an online process. So the parent retirement category application is the only application where paperwork still needs to be sent to Immigration New Zealand. And so that means that documents need to be properly certified, and where physical documents are being submitted, the verification requirements are slightly different. Sponsorship requirements. Now, this might be of interest to a lot of you because a lot of you attending may be on various types of visas, but what you may be is mostly on resident visas, or you might be citizens here. But if you're not, there might still be ways for you to bring your family in, which we could still discuss with you. But in essence, for temporary entry, applicants are required to provide evidence that satisfies INZ that they have sufficient funds to maintain themselves throughout the period of stay in New Zealand. And those funds need to be readily accessible and genuinely available. So, often supplying things like sometimes term deposit information can be helpful, but it's often even better if those funds are available in a transactional account that the client can quite easily access. So we could demonstrate to Immigration New Zealand that in an emergency, these clients are able to either use an overseas EFTPOS card or make a quick bank transfer, as opposed to talk to their bank, break a term deposit, wait for that money to be credited into a transactional account, then draw it. But still, term deposits can work. It's just even better would be a more accessible pool of funds. New Zealand citizen children and New Zealand resident children can provide financial sponsorship. These amounts, so the amounts for sponsorship under the temporary visa categories are different from the resident requirements. They're far lesser. And we can clarify that and what those exact amounts are towards the end of the webinar if someone has a question around them. But essentially, if you're for example, if your parents are going to stay with you, then the requirement for the monthly or weekly requirement required amount is a little bit lesser than if your parents did not have accommodation provided, for example. For resident visa sponsorship requirements, for the parent retirement category, financial sponsorship is not a requirement because, as Aaron said, that is focused on parents demonstrating that they have the income and investment funds to settle in New Zealand. But parents are still required to demonstrate their relationship between their New Zealand citizen or resident child. For the parent residence category, there is a financial sponsorship requirement along with demonstrating your relationship to your New Zealand citizen or resident child. That financial sponsorship requirement, we'll put in information about this towards the end of the webinar. But essentially, those amounts, as Aaron said, change, and there are specific amounts for even the years prior. And so you have to make sure that you meet those sponsorship amount requirements and the income requirements at the time that the expression of interest is submitted. So that's very important. You can't hope and wait to meet it at the time that the application may be selected from the ballot. You must meet those income requirements at the time that you submit the EOI for your parents. We can elaborate on that more a little bit later. In both cases, the New Zealand citizen or resident child must also meet presence requirements and must be able to demonstrate that New Zealand is their primary place of residence. Again, apologies, I've just noticed a minor typo there, but essentially you must be able to demonstrate that you live and you work here permanently. Citizens, you must be able to demonstrate that you have held a resident visa for at least 3 years, or that you are a citizen of New Zealand. Quick notes on health and character. So this is across all applications. Of course, it doesn't matter if you're submitting a general visitor visa, you're coming to visit for a short term. So demonstrating that you have, providing a PCC or providing a medical is not required, but overall, yes, you must be able to demonstrate that you are of good health and character at the time that an application is made. As a precaution, please disclose any health issues to your lawyer or your representative. For residents, you are required to provide a general medical and chest x-ray. And for visitor visa, it says it will usually be required, and I think here we're referring to if it's a longer term visa application, depending on the length of planned stay. So for a shorter term single entry visa, for example, if you're requesting that your parents come visit for say 3 months, then you're not required to submit a PCC or medical. That might also change if, say, they've traveled to New Zealand previously and cumulatively their stay starts to extend or increase beyond sort of 6 to 12 months. But those requirements are applicant specific, so always best to double check. For character, visitor visa may be required, again, depending on length of intended stay. If required, then a police clearance certificate must be provided from a country of citizenship. I can tell you now it will be required for your parent or grandparent temporary entry visas. So PCCs are required from your country of citizenship and any other country that they may have lived in for 5 years or more since attaining the age of 17. For residents, absolutely required, and PCCs are required from any countries of citizenship and anywhere your parents may have lived for 12 months or more in the last 10 years. With any PCCs that you do submit, you are required to disclose any convictions and or charges to Immigration New Zealand. You are also required to advise Immigration New Zealand of any previous declines, deportation history, or any entry refusals. This is quite important because a lot of times people think, oh, well, this happened so long ago, I probably don't need to inform Immigration New Zealand about it. Sometimes we've noticed clients have also said, well, I've already disclosed it in a previous application. I don't see the need to do it now because Immigration knows about it. Logically, yes, absolutely, that makes sense. You've told them this once, why do you need to tell them again? But you absolutely do need to disclose it. Each application is assessed as an individual application. So as an applicant, your obligation remains to inform Immigration New Zealand every time you submit an application. You're making the health and character declarations again as you would a brand new application. and saying, yeah, no, I've had a previous decline from the US or the UK or anywhere I intended to travel. Or yes, I do have this ongoing health issue. So each time you submit an application, you need to make the same declarations, especially where there is a declaration to be made. Okay, now back to Aaron, and we'll jump into what the future holds.
So there's a little bit of a, I suppose, crystal ball gazing here. But I also know from my own discussions with the minister as to what her plans have been for a number of years. Now, of course, the big one is the 5-year visitor visa, which she first raised in discussions would have been, well, before she was the minister, so perhaps 3 years ago. She raised this idea that she wanted to have this, this long-term visitor visa. Her approach was if the person's in the country and they've got insurance to cover their health costs, they're no cost to the country, then it's good for the country because their kids who are here, they're happy with their parents are here, their grandparents are here. It makes everybody happier and no cost to New Zealand. So she's a big fan of the approach of the 5-year visitor visa. Now, of course, came through with with Act wanted this as well, which is fantastic. So as part of the National Act agreement, they have this 5-year visitor visa. Now, she has said that they're working on this next year. She hasn't said when it's going to come through, so it could come through at some point next year. It could come through early 2026. We can't see it being too close to the election, or we look a bit too much like they've been dragging their heels. But I do know that when she went into government, the plans were fixed accreditation system, fixed skilled migrant, which is working on now, and then this was sort of after that taking place. One of the big drawbacks here is going to be that health insurance coverage. I don't know you're going to get a 5-year visa. You need to get 5 years of health insurance paid for, which I think as you get older, the costs are going to go higher. And no one currently, as far as I'm aware, no one currently offers a 5-year health insurance package you pay in advance to migrants. So we get to see as to how that's going to work. Of course, they're going to, because there's money to be made there, but it's going to be an expensive procedure, as will the visa. The visa is going to cost quite a bit of money because it is covering a 5-year period. We have seen people saying that the government might look at doing the insurance themselves. I can't really see that taking place. I think the national governments are about governments doing less and not getting less involved in running companies. So that's at least hasn't been discussed, as far as I'm aware, by the minister, or at least not with me. We would have planned this years ago. But that could be an option, but I can't see it taking place. I can see a Southern Cross NIB sort of people providing that 5-year health package. But that is going to come through next year or 2026. Now, we aren't expecting any changes to the residence categories. That's because nothing's been mentioned, nothing's been rumoured. We would love to see, and that's our personal view, love to see that number being drawn from the pool increase substantially. 2,500 applicants is just not enough for how many people are applying for that pool and living in hope to be drawn. So a high number there would be great, but right now there is nothing we're hearing from our sources as to that being increased. There is, however, a shift we've seen the last few weeks in special circumstances. I mentioned before with the IPT, if you apply for a application, you're offshore, and immigration say, correctly, no, you're not eligible. But the IPT says yes, but there's something here that's extraordinary or abnormal, out of the ordinary. It goes to the minister at that point. Now, up until recently, the minister has always, most cases, just gone, okay, IPT says it's off to you, and they've gone, yep, residence granted. And this is going to the associate minister, so Chris Penk is one who looks at these things. Recently, we've been seeing the minister saying no to applications, not from our one so far, but on other ones that we've seen from others in the industry. So there seems to be a shift in that automatic sort of granting of residence to perhaps more of a review system, or even in some situations just saying no. We're looking into it more at the moment to see if there's some sort of pattern in place, but there has definitely been a shift in that. So getting the IPT saying, yes, your special circumstances off to the minister is no longer almost a guaranteed residency. It's now going to be more of a, hopefully the minister's feeling nice on that day, or it fits in with what he's looking for.
Okay, and with that, we have come to the end of the webinar. So unless, Aaron, you have any final comments on some of the past slides, we can jump into the Q&A.
Let me jump into the Q&A. I see there's one hand up.
Okay.
If you just want to post a question in the Q&A, and we'll then sort of get through all the questions.
Great. Okay, well, we'll start at the very beginning. Hi, Jen. Thanks for your question. So the parent category visa stipulates that you have to apply for the visa from outside New Zealand. If your parent is visiting at the time of the invitation to apply for the visa, do they have to leave the country before you or they can submit the visa application?
I'm wondering if there's a bit of confusion here between the parent-grandparent visitor visa and the parent resident resident visa, because we've had clients who have been on shore when they've done the process and it has been an issue. The requirement, I actually did a check while Helen was talking, went through the legislation or the manual looking for outside New Zealand, which is the term they use in the manual when it comes to that sort of thing, and that did not appear within the instructions for parent resident visa. If anybody else knows where it is, let me know, but I've been through actually all of the instructions for that visa and I cannot find a requirement, or not, I haven't why there'd be a requirement for that. There is a parent-grandparent visa requirement that you apply for it outside New Zealand. If you are granted it while you're in New Zealand, you do have to leave and sort of get a balance transferred across. But when it comes to the parent resident, I'm not aware of there being a requirement to be offshore at any point in the process.
Cool. Cami, hi. Hi, everyone. Thank you for this meeting. Any idea if the parent will have to leave New Zealand after 6 months and re-enter, or if they can stay for the entire 5 years? I think this might be referring to the 5-year visitor visa.
Yeah, so the plan here from the minister was that you can come in here for 5 years. There is no requirement to come and go out of the country. As long as you have insurance, so you're not a cost or a burden to the country, and that your children are also here. They can't leave the country and leave you here on your own. There's no reason why you should be exiting. That's what she told me, and we discussed 3 years ago. And it's what we've seen also from the ACT Party, that they've been sort of pushing that same sort of angle before the election. So I can't see there being a change to that. The idea is that you have insurance, your costs here are covered, you may as well stay.
Great. And a follow-up question from Cami as well is, what will the process be if my husband is the engineer, but I would like my mom, open brackets, who is 80 and has no other children in our home country, close brackets, to apply for the 5-year visa? We are residents.
So when it comes to the application itself, you can apply together. So you either have to be the dependent child, so the child of the parent you're applying for, or the child and their sibling, or the child and their partner. So your husband can't apply for your mother, but you can apply for your mother with your husband being with you in the application. It does mean that the minimum requirement for the pay level does go up, because there's 2 of you that it's relying on, but it does mean that you can use his pay to help towards that threshold.
Great. I can take this one, Aaron. Is the 2,500 new quota system inclusive of temp and residence for parents? Nope. So the 2,500 number is only for residence applications. I don't think there's actually a cap on visitor visas or temporary. I don't think there's a cap on temporary entry applications. So, if anyone who gets approved can come in on a visitor visa, I think it's only a cap on how many parent resident applications are going to be approved. And I think the 2,500 number is an annual number. And Aaron and I were just discussing this before the call, but I think it's 2,500 individuals, and so 2,500 applicants, not 2,500 applications. So that's quite important. It's quite important to know. Okay. If an individual, Mukunda, hi. If an individual has a 1-year multiple entry visa, so a general visitor visa, with maximum stay of 3 months at a time, is the parent allowed to enter New Zealand for a third stay of 3 months in a year, or is there any restriction that applies, allowing only to stay 6 months?
Okay, officially, no, they cannot come in for that third stay. There is a 6 month and 12 rule. Now that's on a general visitor visa. Unofficially, it comes down to the border if they're doing their job correctly. Quite a few people will actually go and do that third one and they'll be let into the country, even though the rules state they probably shouldn't have been. We do discourage our clients from testing that because it's going to be an expensive process to be told when you're checking in for your flight, sorry, that they've said no, you can't board. But that's showing how it works. So that general visitor visa does allow you to do a 6 in 12 month rule. So yeah.
Okay. Eureka, hi. Is it an option to enter for 3 months out of 2 days, or must it be longer period out of INZ? Sorry, out of NZ. Sorry, Aaron, I don't know if I understand the question. Are you, is it an option to yeah.
It depends whether you're on a general visitor visa or a parent retirement visa. If you have a right to re-enter the country, how long you're out of the country for doesn't actually matter. You could basically, I would probably do 1 day difference, but in New Zealand you can't really do the same. Anyway, but I'd say go to Australia for a day, come back again. There is no minimum time period. As long as you're allowed to be in the country for that new period, then it doesn't matter how long you're out.
Chelsea, hi. If a parent had a previous residence visa, open brackets, from the 90s, but now expired, close brackets, would this be a good or bad thing for their chances to enter New Zealand on a new parent retirement or residence visa? I could answer that. I don't think that's going to make a huge difference. I'm sorry to hear that the visa expired, and I would actually encourage you to reach out to us because it'd be interesting to know why that happened, and there might be some special circumstances here that we can explore. But I don't think it's a bad thing. Again, it just depends on their individual circumstances. Is it a good thing? I think what matters going forward now under these new policies or even under the parent retirement policy is just whether or not they meet the requirements, and or whether or not they're selected. I guess with the resident visa, going back to what Aaron said, because it's a ballot system now, the chances of actually being selected, are so low given the volumes of applications and applicants that are sitting in the pool waiting to be selected. So if there's a chance that they might meet the investment requirements under the parent retirement category, then I would say absolutely, give that a go. But there may be some special circumstances here, which we'd be interested to know about as to why that visa expired. So if you'd like, feel free to get in touch with us. For the parent retirement category, is it possible for the child sponsors to gift the necessary funds to the parents, or does the source of funds need to be earned by the overseas parents? Aaron?
It can be gifted, but not from New Zealand. So you can be gifted the funds, but they cannot be funds that are already in New Zealand. And you also can't take money from New Zealand out offshore and then gift it, because immigration is going to ask for the source of the funds, and they're going to see that. So yes, it can be gifted, but it must be from funds that were earned overseas and which still remain overseas.
Lee, hi. This is a very interesting question, and I know Aaron's going to enjoy answering it. Can the IPT grant an age waiver on general skilled migrant residence visa if the parent is 5 years older than the cutoff age? Context: applicant was not able to apply for SMRV due to applications closed down for the COVID period, and then the rules changing after, aka AEWV, etc.
So the short answer is they can, but they probably won't. If you go to the IPT, if most likely they'll be on shore, and you're appealing the decision on the skilled residency, then the IPT is going to say, well, immigration was correct. Are there special circumstances? Well, not really, because lots of people were caught out by that change in the rules. So on that basis, they're probably going to say no. Now, if we look also at they go under humanitarian grounds, is it sort of extraordinary circumstances? Not really, because again, they're probably one of many who are caught out by that rule change. So unfortunately not, while they can grant it, I don't think that they would be granting it. We would go and do a review of the IPT decisions to see whether it has been done in the past, but I've read through hundreds of decisions, if not thousands, and they don't do that, unfortunately.
A follow-up question from Chelsea. If my parent, open brackets, my mum, is now in marriage with a new partner, would I submit one application which includes coverage of husband, or would I have to apply twice, one for mum and one for stepdad? Aaron?
One application, whether you're going for a parent, grandparent, or whether you're going for parent resident, parent retirement, you'll include, there's the primary applicant, who'll be your mother, and the secondary applicant is based on the relationship between the applicants, not with you. So you're supporting your mother, and then she has a partner attached to her. So you do one application.
Cool. Paulina, hi. Sorry to read about your circumstances. That sounds very tricky. So Paulina says, I'm a Russian/New Zealand citizen with an anti-war stance involved in protests and movements. Returning home could mean 10 years in prison, and my family back home is under threat of fines and pressure from the authorities. Could this help an immigration tribunal consider bringing my mother over? What are the consequences if the application is not approved? So the Immigration Protection Tribunal and appeals to the Immigration Protection Tribunal, as Aaron mentioned, are your last resort, and the circumstances are usually exceptional, they're humanitarian, and the threshold is quite high. The way for an appeal to be triggered is you've actually got to go through the process of doing things like first applying for a visa, having that visa declined, and then your right of appeal is triggered. Similarly, say if an applicant is in New Zealand, they have a visa decline or they become unlawful, then a right of appeal is triggered, depending on the circumstances. So my understanding of the appeals process or going to the Immigration Protection Tribunal is that you can't just appeal to the Immigration Protection Tribunal. There has to be something that occurs there that then triggers a particular section of the Immigration Act, which allows you to file an appeal, or which gives you the right to file an appeal to the Immigration Protection Tribunal. I don't quite know what you mean there when you say what are the consequences if the application is not approved. If here you're talking about, say, a residence application being declined, then a right of appeal arises, and that appeal could be on, humanitarian grounds. It could be on humanitarian grounds, and your circumstances do sound pretty exceptional. I would actually encourage you to reach out to us and talk to us a little bit more about it and see if there's something that we could do to help. Aaron, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's always hard when they're outside the country, because when it comes to sort of that, effectively sort of a refugee status is what we should be looking at. But immigration won't, so I don't want to look at that unless you're actually within New Zealand. If you're outside New Zealand, then you're looking at the UNHCR to sort of handle that process. So if she was onshore, and she could then, claim refugee status, whether she would get it based on the threat of fines, probably not. If it was the threat of jailed for without reason, possibly. Definitely was no result of possible torture, then more likely. So it would come down to proving what would happen to her if she went back. But yeah, if you got into New Zealand, refugee could be an option. If you were to apply for an application, say for parent retirement, and it was declined for whatever reason, you could try special circumstances, but you need to be able to meet most of the criteria and then claim this as sort of a side thing. And even then, the minister might not say yes. So if hypothetically such a situation, if she was in New Zealand, then an asylum might be an option, but definitely talk to us first, because if it's declined, that probably be cutting off her chance to be here ever in the future again.
Yeah. Chantel, hi. Thank you so much for this meeting. Anytime, that's what we're here for. My mom is here on the grandparents' visa 6 months at a time. Is there any way that my mom can work during the 6 months? No. This is a visitor visa, so there are no work rights associated with this visa. She can study for up to 3 months in each year, but she cannot work. There are other options if she does wish to work. For example, depending on her skills, depending on whether she can find a job, she could perhaps look at an accredited employer work visa. But as everyone probably knows these days, that's quite difficult to get, and it also might depend on her age too. So there's several things there to consider. But no, on the 6 month, sorry, on the parent grandparent visitor visa, I'm afraid there is no work rights. You have had a follow-up question for us. If my mom stays here on the grandparents visa 6 months at a time, how long does she have to be outside of NZ before returning to NZ again? Aaron?
Hours. Just leave the country and re-enter. She has that, as Hannah said before, she has that 18 months in total over the 3-year period. She can do 6 months out and in, 6 months out and in, 6 months. But then she has a year and a half outside the country, which she can't come to the country again that year and a half period. So she could just basically, come here, fly from here to Australia and back, and start 6 months more. There's no minimum time period.
Yep, thank you. Vash, please explain the point of multiple entry if they are granting up to 18 months in a 3-year period. Why does there have to be 6 months at a time? You know what? We asked the same question. And honestly, there's really no answer. I guess what they're trying to do is there's just maybe they're just trying to balance. I don't know. This is my view. Aaron would tack on, and he might have something else to say too. But I think it's got, because Immigration New Zealand is just trying to balance risks as well. So for example, if you're granting parents, especially, and I think it's also from a pressure on the healthcare system perspective, and there's several other things. I mean, I guess if you're granting a long-term visa, then what you don't want to say, and this is just, I think, their perspective and where they might be coming from, and it might sound a bit overkill, but I do think that that's probably what they're thinking. Is they're thinking, well, if we allow people to stay, like if we allow parents and grandparents to stay here for, say, a year or straight without any time restrictions, then what if they get sick? What if they end up in hospital? What if they're actually unable to pay for their healthcare costs? What if they rack up a huge hospital bill? So I think the idea of limiting or breaking down those visits into shorter visits, maybe the intention there is to allow for that reset, but also to kind of balance, hopefully no one getting sick or putting pressures on all of our other social services. Maybe that's the intention. I actually don't know. But it's just a thought that I have. What do you think, Aaron?
I think I'm a bit more pessimistic about immigration, or maybe about their thinking in advance. I think there's probably main reason is because before they brought through the parent-grandparent visa, they had a 6-month basis for visas, and then they brought this in and they thought, okay, we'll just leave it as it is. So you have, by default, the 6-month period. I think that's probably how it originally came through. It was the base period they had already. I also wonder whether there was a mindset of, okay, if we make it 6 months, people aren't going to settle down and think, okay, this is my life where I live now. It's going to still be in their mindset as being, this is a visit for 6 months. So it could be sort of a part of bit of the both of them. I'm sort of probably more go towards the former. The base set was just, that's what the rules were, so we'll run with it. But it could be that later one as well.
Chelsea had a follow-up question. Do you think you'll be able to apply for a 5-year visa more than once, totaling 10 years? Aaron?
The idea we had back years ago, and from what we've heard from the ACT Party, was that yes, the idea was you can get a new one and just basically keep renewing them every 5 years, which would be great for parents, gives them some stability. Would be expensive as they get older for the health insurance side of things. But as I said, for the current government, the idea was if they're in New Zealand, then locals are happier because their parents and grandparents are here. So it's a win-win situation.
Shelza, hi. For the parent-grandparent multiple visa, if the parent exits after 6 months, is there a minimum number of days that they have to stay outside of New Zealand? Thanks. Yeah, you're welcome. No, there isn't a minimum number of days they have to stay outside of New Zealand if they're entry or exiting. So, they sometimes we've had clients whose parents just travel to Australia for a day, they travel to Fiji for a day, and then they come back in again, and the 6 months just resets. So there is no minimum number of days that they have to stay out. Well, if that's the question you're asking of the minimum number between the 6 month entry exit periods, then I hope I've given you that answer. Um, Nikki, hi. Is there a list of the IPT? I think that's what you're referring to, your requirements for special circumstances visa, special resident visa. We moved here with the impression 9 years ago that we could bring our parents in. Because it's changed multiple times since 2016, is there a grace allowance for these changes? Aaron?
Unfortunately, no. Basically, the
Mm,
IPT is there to enforce the legislation as it stands, enforce the operational manual. They do have that discretion, but they generally won't be there to say, immigration, you changed things, that wasn't right, or that's unfair, we're going to disagree with you. They
mm,
they are part of the court, they're sort of district court level. They are required to apply the law as it stands, and unfortunately, if the law sort of got changed multiple times and they're no longer eligible, then that's what they have to sort of comply with. They do have that allowance to look for special circumstances that they can sort of go to the minister and say, hey, there's a situation here, but
mm,
that's not so much a list. There is court cases that will give you an idea as to what they're looking for, but it's not sort of a special visa they grant. It's basically just looking for situations where having a heart or would be helpful to everybody.
yeah. Paulina, thank you very much for your help. This was very helpful. I'll reach out to you. Oh, thank you. Thank you for attending. Um, Nico, before the EOI, 12th October 2022 was opened, we wrote a letter to INZ asking when we can apply. The answer was that the category is currently suspended and we can apply only when it opens up. When we applied on the 18th of October 2022, we ended up in the ballot. Some applicants, however, continued to forward their EOIs before October 2022 and was put in the queue and selected. We feel that we were misled by INZ as we could have also applied before October 2022 and ended up in the queue. Is it worth our effort to address this to be assessed now as we were treated unfairly? Wow, this situation was so incredibly common. I can't tell you how many times we told clients similar things, but also said it's worth a try. This is it's just worth a try. Take your chance because we just don't know when the pool will open. What's the worst that can happen? You might lose out on a couple of $100. I think I remember that being our advice. If the, I'm trying to remember whether there used to be a fee associated. Yeah, but I think I remember that being our advice back then. 2022 seems like a long time ago. But Aaron, what would you say?
Oh, it's the same as you. My
Yeah.
advice to my clients back then basically were it's a couple $100. Um, jump
Mm,
in there anyway. Why
mm,
not? See how it goes. And they're really glad that they did that because
mhm,
as you saw, INZ was saying, hey, it's suspended. Don't bother. And we
mm.
were saying, well, why not get in there? So definitely unfair of INZ to
Yeah.
get that communication. It wasn't correct communication. The hardest part, and we find this all the time, is that when INZ makes mistakes, it's very hard for them to be accountable for those mistakes. One recently, we had an application which I had like 5 complaints over and like multiple errors again and again with the application. And now they're going, well, you've got it sorted now, it's fixed. So, yeah, but it cost our client money for us to fix it. And that's their mindset. They don't take responsibility for things. They don't handle the costs of things. It really is just that's how things were. Oh well, moving on. It's not. I like to see the government step up and say, okay, we made a mistake here. Let's try and resolve it. But it's a long, hard road to get to that point. But so unfortunately, no, there's not much you can do about that. You were one of many who were misled by immigration on that.
Mm. Like Kim has said, if you think that it might be worth having a chat with us anyway, she's put down our email address in the comments, so please feel free to get in touch. Lee, if on a 3 or 5 year visitor visa, can the parent change to an AEWV once she's offered a job while in NZ? And does the parent need to leave NZ prior or just change visas? I think you can apply for further visas while you're on shore. Is that right, Aaron?
That's correct, yeah. So if you're in
Yes.
New Zealand on a visitor visa and you by chance happen to find a job that you've got
Yeah.
an offer for and you meet the criteria for, then you can apply while you're on shore. There's no need to leave the country.
Yeah. And a follow-up question from Lee was, are there any country benefits for the parent being on a 5-year parent visitor visa other than being with family? I mean, I guess they're just with you longer, and you all get to be together. I don't know if there's going to be any special benefits to the 5-year visa or whether they're going to do anything any differently. I just think it's a longer term visa. Aaron, what are your thoughts?
It's hard to say.
Mm,
They're still thinking about it. They haven't started thinking about it yet. They're starting that next year. So right now we are just sort of working on what was discussed a few years ago and announced by during the elections. So yeah, it is that right to be here for 5 years. That's the main thing with your family. Otherwise, we just don't know how they're going to handle it.
mm. Of interest, just taking a bit of a sidestep from the questions for a second, do you think that they do you think it might be a 6-month multiple, like a similar thing with 6 months in, 6 months out? Or do you just think it would be come as you please, stay as long as you want, as long as you've got your health insurance, we're happy for you to, we won't have sort of like a 6-month limit on your stay.
From the discussions we had, it was basically there was no point in people leaving the country and re-entering the country if that was the point is being here. So the idea was you come here, you stay here for 5 years if you want, you come and go as you please. There was no in and out of the country because you're coming here for a 5-year visa. Let's not pretend you're just going offshore for a couple of days holiday. You're just resetting the visa.
Yes.
As I said before, I think that whole 6-month thing was just an anachronism, an old status thing. The reality is that we all know what you're doing, so just be here for 5 years. So I think that's what they're going to do. It will basically just be come here and stay if you want for 5 years, or come and go as you please.
Yeah. Well, there you go. That's another benefit. If that is how the visa will be structured, then that is clearly it's a better visa type as opposed to what the current 3 years offering. Magda, does the applications before 2022 for parents visa form part of the draw, or are they handling that separately, or how are they handled? So any applications submitted prior to 2022 are within the 2000 quota, within the 2000 number quota. So until Immigration New Zealand works its way through all those applications, and we'll keep selecting 2000, we'll keep approving up to 2000 applicants from those applications. And until they finish all of that, they're going to get priority in that 2000 number. So so they don't form part of the ballot draw. They are within the queue. They will be assessed. They will be decided, and if approved, they will form part of the 2000 annual quota. It is only once immigration goes through all those applications that the 2,500 will then become all 2,500, which will be everyone selected from the ballot. But until that happens, the 2,000 is allocated purely for all applications submitted before 2022. Okay, I see we've got a couple of people raising their hands. If you could put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'd be happy to answer them for you. We've got another question from Lee. Does the fact that my mom has been on working visas for these past 5 years, being a tax-paying temporary resident, have any benefit for future parent visas? Aaron?
No. They will look at this as a new application. It helps that it will show that she was lawful for that period. She was here lawfully and followed the rules. That would help for when they're looking at her and her bona fides, whether she's genuine and honest. But it won't actually make a difference to the application itself.
Yep, that's right. Okay. We've still got a little bit of time before this webinar closes. If anyone has any further questions, you're welcome to ask us now. But while we're waiting on some we've got some questions come through. Charmaine, question from my dad, smiley face. My wife and I are South African parents of 2 daughters and their families, including 2 grandchildren, all lovely, all living in Napier. Oh, such a beautiful part of the country. We have 3 pertinent questions for your comments, please. Scenario. We have lodged our EOI in July 2023, but have not been invited to apply for the permanent visa. Our 3-year visa will expire on 5th December 2025, but we want to continue staying with the children and grandchildren as much as possible. Right? Question 1. With our EOI still pending, can we apply for another 3-year parent-grandparent visa in July, which is 5 to 6 months prior to the expiry of our current visa, or do we need to wait until 6 December 2025 before we can submit again? Question 2. We'll answer them one at a time, I think. Aaron, with our EOI still pending, can we apply for another 3-year parent-grandparent in July?
You need to wait until the December 6th. So you have to wait for your current visa to expire before you can apply for another parent-grandparent visa.
And will they have to do that overseas? Will they
Yes,
have to be
will.
offshore
so
for that?
You need to head offshore. Either you can sort of go offshore now and save some time up for later on your stay here, or head offshore come July and wait offshore until December and apply again then.
Okay. Question 2, is it recommended to apply for a second 3-year visa while we still have a pending EOI?
Definitely. As I said before, the draw stats for the EOI are pretty shockingly low. So keep in your mindset how you're going to stay in New Zealand for as much time as possible while that's being drawn. We hope the figures go up, but definitely, yeah.
Okay. And final question, what are the criteria for taking the humanitarian route to expedite the EOI? Our daughter is currently receiving chemotherapy, not cancer, and needs assistance in and around home. When speaking to INZ, this does not qualify for us to apply under the humanitarian cause. Hey, I think we need to have a chat, and I think we'd love to talk to you about this, because I think this is, at least in our professional opinion, you might be meeting the threshold there. So, or you might be getting very close to it. And we'd like to talk to you a little bit more about all your other circumstances to see whether there's any chances of exploring a humanitarian route for you further. But please get in touch with us, because I think we could answer this question for you in a little bit more detail in a conversation. Ojani, hi, I'm on a 3-year parent and grandparent visitor visa, and I'm now looking to apply for a student visa to study a 1-year course. While my main purpose for the current visa was to visit my child, I now want to pursue further studies to achieve personal goals. I'm committed to following all student visa conditions and want to ensure my bona fide intentions are clear. Could you advise on how to best explain this to INZ? Thank you. Aaron?
Even uses the correct term, bona fide. I'll have to see that. We've actually done this before for a client who came to New Zealand, was with her family. She was elderly, but she wanted to go and study for a couple of years. And it came down to actually showing why she wanted to study. Now, in her case, she spoke like 5 languages and she wanted to learn English and be better at English because she loved languages. And immigration was like, fair enough. That's was her job for years. Her passion was languages, and they granted her 2 years of student visas. So you have to be able to show that there is a valid reason for why you want to study. Now, if you're older and the chances of you working again are probably slim, then going and studying something that's related to employment might not be acceptable, because they're going to go, well, you're not going to work with that anyway. But if you have a passion for a certain area and you can show a history of that area, that you love it, then you could have grounds there to actually go for a student visa. So definitely worth looking at.
Yeah, great. Ashwini, hi. Can rental income also be considered for financial requirement for parent resident visa, or just salary and wages? Aaron?
Yes, it can. So for that $60,000 per year, this is actually, yep. So I think parent retirement visa, I'm thinking you're meaning. in which case it's $60,000 per year of income coming in when you apply. That could be wages, it could be passive income from rent, it could be money from investments, disbursements, distributions from shareholdings. Anything that basically has money coming in, you can show that in the last 12 months, there's that money coming in from lawful reasons. When it comes to other things, like if you're looking at your parent resident and you're looking at sponsoring a parent, it might be the question there. It comes down to showing what you've basically declared to IRD. So often if you're self-employed, you may have part of that income coming in. Now, if you're declaring that rental income as part of your income, IRD will show that, and at which point you can show that in most circumstances. If you're taking rental income but you're not declaring it as taxable, then you're breaching the Income Tax Act. But immigration are going to say, hey, you're not actually meeting the criteria there. So it will depend on the situation, but it can be included in some scenarios.
Cool. And Sadushi, hi, my mom is already under a multiple general visitor visa. Can she apply for the 3-year visa while on her general visitor visa, or does she need to wait until her general visitor visa gets over? So I think the first thing is and again, Aaron, you tack on, but I think the first thing is that if she's applying for the parent-grandparent multiple entry, she actually does have to be offshore. So I don't think she can. Yeah, I think she'd have to be offshore, and then apply for the parent-grandparent multiple entry. I don't know if it would necessarily matter, or would she need to wait until her general visitor visa gets over? I mean, ideally, I think it's, if you've got a visa, use it for as long as you can and for as long as you're able. But if you're for something like applying for a further visa, and especially the parent-grandparent 3-year multiple entry, I believe she will have to go overseas and then submit an application. Aaron?
With the general visitor visa, she can apply for a new one while she's onshore and while the visa is still in place.
Yeah.
But it will come down to, they'll look at it and go, okay, has she been in New Zealand for more months than allowed for the granting of that visa? There is maximum time periods. And if she has been, they're going to say, no, she's been in New Zealand too long, wait a few more months to try again. So it will come down to what her travel history is.
Okay. And what about if she wanted to apply for the 3-year multiple entry, parent-grandparent?
I think it's that would fall under the 9 and 18-month rule, where basically any visa granted, it won't allow her to be more than 9 months in the last 18 months. So
right, yes, of course, yeah.
Some rules in place there. They're daily drafted and they sort of contradict with each other. But generally, it will come down to, if she's used that visa for like a couple of months in the last 3 years, probably not an issue. If she's been here the last 6 months, probably going to be an issue. So these are on her travel history.
Okay. And can you please share the contact details where we can reach out for a consultation? So I'm just going to, if you can also still see the slides, which I believe you can, I'm just going to flick to the last screen. So right on the top right-hand corner, we've got our email address with a direct dial for us as well. So you can certainly get in touch with us on that email at any time, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. Final question for the evening. What is the minimum period for a partner of mine to be seen as a partner and to help sponsor my mum on a parent visa? And does the partner need to be in a romantic relationship, or can my partner be my dad? Example, my parents are divorced back when I was 5, still great friends, but both me and my dad are residents independently. Can my dad and I join together to sponsor my mum for a parent resident visa? Aaron?
Unfortunately not. It can either be your romantic partner or it can be your sibling. It cannot be your father support his ex, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, and with that, we're 2 minutes away from closing off today. So we'll start winding down, but I just, we just wanted to say thank you so very much for giving us your time this evening, and we hope we could answer all your questions. You're most welcome to get in touch with us at any time on the email address provided. For any follow-up questions you might have, post this webinar, we will be sending out an invitation to our registrants for a consultation. So you're welcome to take advantage of that, and we can schedule in a time for you to have a chat with us to see how we can help, and we could talk a little bit more about your individual circumstances. A huge thanks to our colleague Kim, who's been fielding these questions for us and responding to you with our contact details where we think your circumstances might warrant a more in-depth discussion. Yeah, Aaron, any final comments?
Probably just that for those who we know that some of your friends couldn't make it today, we have recorded this. I'm going to edit it the next few days, put it online maybe on the weekend. And so it will be available on the platforms for them to check out. Hopefully it was helpful. And yeah, any questions, get in contact with us. Yeah.
Thank you again very much, everyone, and have a wonderful evening. See ya. Bye.